Hey everyone, it's Anna. Welcome back to my channel. So today is the release of the August limited edition stamp set from Impression Obsession, and it is a beautiful winter or Christmas time foliage set. So I thought I would share the images with you and then also share a finished card with you and show you how to make that card. So this is a beautiful holly branch, and it has little holly berries in there as well. I love the extra etching detail on these stamps. Here is a 3-prong pine branch, really beautiful. We're also going to be using this holly branch on the card we make today. There's this cute little berry sprig. It has 2 berries and just a little extra stem there if you need to add some extra detail. Here is a single pine bough branch, similar to the 3-branch one. We'll also use that one today. And then here is this foliage piece as well. This has more of like a blueberry leaves. I'm not sure what kind of berry this is, maybe a snowberry, but it has more of the drop style leaves, or these little, instead of the holly leaves that are spiky, these have the smooth edge like a blueberry leaf. But I'm not sure what kind of berry that is supposed to be, but we'll use that one as well. And then it also has this beautiful poinsettia done in the same etched style design. And then there's mistletoe. This is a beautiful stamp. It not only has the mistletoe, but there's also a bow as well, keeping all those stems together. And there's a cute little pine cone. And then there's 2 sentiments. This one says warm holiday wishes, and this one says season's greetings. And I love this particular font, and I'm going to use this on my card today as well. So let me show you the card that I've made, and then I will show you how to make it. So here is my finished card. So you can see the stamped images there, just kind of all around on the background. This is watercolor paper. This is the Canson XL watercolor paper. So it's a very readable, easy to find watercolor paper, and it's not very expensive. You can usually find a pad of it for about $10. And then you can see I've stamped my sentiment here, and then the die cut piece that you see here is from the Slimlines set that just released with Impression Obsession, and this is one of my recent die sets, and this is the Slimlines 1 set. So it comes with a little fishtail banner, and then the piece that I'm going to use to cut my sentiment is this smallest Slimline layering piece. So it's a really nice size for sentiment banners, and you can extend the length if you need to for a longer sentiment, or you can cut it short like I did and use it for smaller sentiments. So let me go ahead and show you how to make this card. So what I used, let's see, I used some watercolors. I also used a couple of different inks, and I'll tell you why here shortly. Let me put this back on my block. So the first thing I did was I cut down a piece of watercolor paper to 3 3/4 by 5. 3 3/4 inches by 5. So that's the size of watercolor paper there. And the first thing I want to do is I want to add some ink that's reactivated with water to my background here, just to give it a little bit more of a aged look, knock back that white just a little bit. And the reason I want to have a ink that reactivates with water, or changes when you add water to it, because I'm going to show you how you can add some additional distressing. In addition to adding ink, you can actually add water and just add a little bit of extra visual interest to your cardstock or your watercolor paper. So just really easily, I happened to use Vintage Photo from Distress Ink. I really love this ink. It's one of my absolute favorites, and I love using it in this type of a card design. So once you've got that all done, then the next thing I've done is I have used the Impression Obsession ink in the color Olive. And this is one of my favorite ink colors from Impression Obsession. I love all the earthy colors. This olive, I think, is just one of my favorites. So I'm going to stamp that up, and then I'm going to go ahead and stamp this on my watercolor panel, and I'm going to stamp it one time, and then re-ink it and stamp it again. Isn't that beautiful? I love that color. So I'll go ahead and ink it up again. And I love the Impression Obsession ink pads. They're really nice and juicy. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp this at a different angle here on this side. Beautiful. I'm going to ink it up again. I really only have to ink now the top edge of that stamp because the other parts of it will be off of the edge of my watercolor paper, you'll see. So there's that. Gorgeous, gorgeous. I just love that color of green. So now let's take one of the other images. I'll go ahead and peel that off and get that cleaned. So now I'm going to use this other short berry branch. Like I said, I don't know what that berry branch is called, but I'm going to call it Snowberry because it's probably not a blueberry. But it probably could be easily used as a blueberry. So I'm going to stamp this one where I have some open space. Give it another good ink. And stamp it over on this side where I have some open space. And then I have a big open space down here, so I'm going to stamp it again. Beautiful. And now that one is done. I can take that off, set it aside and clean it. And now I'm going to fill in some areas with this single pine bough. This is a cute little branch here. And what I'm going to do with this one, I'm going to ink it up and then I'm going to stamp it off so I can lighten that ink color a little bit. So it's more of just like a design in the background. So it's not quite so heavily inked. And it's not leaving very much ink on the watercolor paper, but it is adding some extra visual interest to the background here. Okay, just stamp those a few times. And now what I think I'll do is I'll add a few of these little berries. So I'll go ahead and put those on my block and ink those up. And I'm going to stamp these in full ink. I'm not going to stamp it off so that they show up really nice. Put one down there. I think I'll put one up here. And I think I'll put one down here. One will fit nicely, just like that. And I think I'll put one up in this corner here. There we go. So that's all the stamping that needs to be done in green. So cute. All right, so now we're ready to move on to the next step, and that is involving watercoloring. And you can use any watercolors that you have on hand. For this card here, I used some Daniel Smith watercolors, but totally not necessary. So I'm going to pull out this Milang set that I got last month, I think it was. This one has 36 colored watercolors, and then it has a row of metallic or sparkle watercolors. So I thought this would be fun because I'll be able to add a little bit of gold really easily to my card. Make a little bit of room here. Let me get that thing off of there. And it comes with this little brush, but I'm not going to use it today. I am just going to use this little inexpensive Royal Aquilon brush to paint the image. And then I'm also going to have on hand this Blick Academic Sable. This is just a really floppy round brush. I like using this when I'm adding splatters to things, because the floppier and fluffier the brush that you use, I think the more interesting your splatters are. When you use a small brush like this for your splatters, you'll get really small splatters and little speckles, but I want to use a larger, floppier brush today. So what I'm going to do is just try and make some extra room here. I'm going to paint in my holly and berry branches here. My workspace is closing in on me. I need to clean my desk. I'm going to paint my holly leaves here with a green, like an olive colored green paint. So I think I'll probably use this one called Tree Green. And I'm also going to mix in a little bit of blue. So I'll probably use this Payne's Gray. In this set, it really leans towards like an indigo color, which I really love. So those are the two colors I'll probably use, Tree Green and Payne's Gray. So I think that's this color way down here. Yes. I'm just going to mix them in my palette here. You can see I already had some on the lid from the last time I used this paint. And this is the indigo up here, or excuse me, Payne's Gray. Yeah. So I'm going to use those two colors. And I'm going to prime the gold here just by adding some water to it, just to get that that pan of gold sparkle activated. The sparkle colors do take a little bit of more time than the regular watercolors to activate. So I like adding a little bit of water to the one I want to use prior to needing to use it. All right, so now I'm just really quickly, that's the key, quickly just going to watercolor the stamp design with just a really thin consistency of the watercolor ink. So you can see how much water I added there. You can also see the pan lid through the watercolors. So it's very, very translucent. Lots of water, mix it in nicely, and you'll get a really nice translucent paint. So I'm just really quickly going to paint these images. You don't have to stay in the lines or anything. I'm going to paint the holly leaves green, and then when I go to paint the snowberry, I will use more of the blue. So just really quickly painting this in. You can see I'm not being very careful at all to stay within the lines. And the other thing I want you to notice is when you use the ink that reactivates with water, that brown, it adds to your watercolor. So it really gives your watercolors a little bit more character than it has on its own. And that's why I like using the ink that activates with water on my background. Okay, so there's all my holly leaves painted. Really quick and easy. Let those dry, and then you can come back to them later and add a little bit more depth by adding another layer to that paint. Now I'm going to move on to paint the snowberry, and I'm going to add a little bit of blue to my green, make a beautiful blue-green color. And again, it's still very thin, and just really easily and quickly come in and paint these leaves. You don't have to stay within the lines. It's one of the beauties about this little technique is it's very free and casual. Get a quick bit of color down on there. And it's still that brown from the layer below is now mingling with my paint and adding lots of extra interest. So there I've painted all of my berry sprigs, the leaves, and now I'm going to go in and paint the berries. So I'm going to use this yellow ochre color, and it's just some I had in the palette here on the lid from a previous painting session. And I'm going to paint the big berries with the yellow, and I'm going to paint the smaller berries red. And this just adds a little bit of gold to that image there. And now I'll go ahead and use a dark red. Let's see, this is going to be beautiful. I'm going to water that down as well so that I can see through the paint to the palette, because I want a really nice thin consistency. You can always come back and add more layers if you want to darken your painting. But I like starting with a really thin layer of color first. And just quickly blob on a little bit of red there for those berries. And when you have that done, you're going to want to set it aside and let everything dry. Got one more little sprig over here. Okay. And I'm also going to, since I can really see this stem here, I'm going to add a little bit of brown here to that, just a smidge, just to give that a little bit of detail there. Just really lightly. And then while I have my paints out still, I'm going to add a little bit of green here. I can see I missed that leaf. And there was one more that I saw that I missed. Oh, I missed a berry up here. Okay. So now go ahead and let this dry. All right, so now for the most part, my painted panel here is dry. I do have a wet berry up here and a wet berry over here, but the rest of the image is dry. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come in and add a little bit more ink or a watercolor pigment to those same areas, and I'm gonna use the same colors that I used previously. So I'm gonna be using that tree green, which is a really nice little olive color, and a little bit of that Payne's gray, and I'm going to mix it fairly thin again, and I'm just going to come in and add a little bit more pigment to the center area of the leaves. And again, you don't have to be really careful. Obviously this is just a really loose watercolor design. Really easy to do. And if you go outside the lines, it's perfectly okay. Get a little bit more. So there you can see I've just used a little bit more green on all of those holly leaves. Now I'm going to come back with a little bit more of that blue, that Payne's blue gray, and I'm going to add it to my snowberry leaves. And over here. All right, now I'm going to add also a little bit of color to the berries again. So I'm going to start with that gold ochre or yellow ochre and add just a little bit there to the berries. Just adds a little bit more visual interest if you can add another layer of color there. And now I'll go in and add a little bit more to my red berries as well. You want to be careful not to touch your red into your green too much, because that will bleed. Since your green's still wet, that red will bleed. But if you get a little in there, it's not a big deal. Oops, I have one more little sprig to do. Okay, there we go. So now I'm going to actually let this dry, and I'll be right back. All right, so my panel is now completely dry, and what I want to do now is I want to just give a little bit more interest around these leaves. So I'm going to grab my paintbrush and just use just regular clear water. There's no extra pigment involved. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint around my leaves a little bit and activate just a little bit of that ink that I have down below my stamped image. And this is just going to add a little bit more interest around my leaves. You can do it kind of like a shadow, and just adds a little bit more of a distressed look to your painted design. And once you are happy with the amount of water that you've added, you can go ahead and add some splatters as well. Like I said, if you use a small paintbrush like this one, your splatters are going to be small and more like just little speckles. But if you use a larger brush like this one, which holds a lot more water, your splatters will be much larger and, in my opinion, a lot more fun. So I'm also going to pick up some of that gold ink that I activated on the palette. You can see it here, really beautiful. So I'm just going to add that to my big splattery brush and give my design a few splotches of gold. And you can actually splatter in some of the pigments that you used as well, the watercolor pigments that you used. So I think I might actually add a little bit of that green and the blue. I'll mix those on my palette. mix them together so I have a beautiful combination of those two colors. Woo! Got a little crazy with that one, didn't I? So now that you've added a little bit of splatter, and also if you're not quite happy with it, you can pick it up a little bit with the paper towel as well. So, but I kind of like the, you know, as it landed look to it. So go ahead and let this dry and we'll move on to the next step. All right, so now that my card layer is completely dry, I'm going to wipe up this extra around here just real quick. So now that that's all dry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to splatter it with just plain water again, and then I'm going to lift up the water with my paper towel. And what this is going to do is just add a little bit more interest to the background, and it's only going to lift that water reactive ink in the background. It shouldn't interact with your watercolors too much. So there, we've lightened some areas and just given it a little bit more interest. So we're ready to move on to the next step now. I'm going to add a little bit of that water reactive ink to the outside edge of my stamped panel. And at this point, you don't actually have to use the reactive ink. You could use any brown ink that you like. But since I have this handy, I'm just going to continue to use this. And all this does is just darken that outside edge just a little bit. There you go. So I think that's really beautiful. I love the addition of the gold in there. Must be the old lady in me. Let's see. I want to get my brushes out of the water. And now that we've done this, it's time to stamp our sentiment. I'm going to go ahead and use this extra piece of cardstock here that I have. It's actually watercolor paper. I'm going to stamp my sentiment on here. And I have this VersaFine ink here handy on my desk, so I'll use that. First, what you could do though, if you want this to really match your project, just ink this up with the same water reactive ink that you use on your card. That way it knocks that white back and gives you a nice cream colored surface to work with. And I'm going to stamp my sentiment here. Just like that. It doesn't have to be straight, because what you're going to do then next is you're going to use your die and position it exactly where you want it over your stamped sentiment. I'm going to position it right about there, I think. And I'm going to put a little bit of washi tape on here just to kind of hold that in place, because the die cutting machine that I'm going to be using doesn't actually have a magnetic base. So that will hold those two together. I'm going to pop this little sidekick down here on my desk and set the die in between the little plates and run it through my machine. Suck this down to the table. It's so wobbly. There we go. And now I have a nice framed die cut sentiment all ready to use. So the other thing that I did on my finished card, if I could find it to show you, is I added some stamping of the pine or the holly leaves to the sentiment area as well. So what I want to do is try and figure out just how far over my stamped image I want my sentiment to read. So I think I'm going to place it over this area. This is where I really blopped that really large splattering of ink. But see, if I place the sentiment right there, it covers all of that somewhat of a mess. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm also going to go ahead and fold this back. You could score this if you wanted to as well, but scoring it, it's just an extra step when it's not always necessary. And just give it a quick press down. And I always like to, when I'm using my bone folder that's not Teflon, I usually score it on the back side so that hides that shiny part of the paper that it does. So see, there's that beautiful sentiment image. So now what I'm going to do, since I have this nice and ready, I can go ahead and stamp my image on here. I think I'll use the snowberry image, and I'm going to stamp it in that same olive green color. I'm not sure I got a good inking on that. There we go. And I'm just going to stamp it partially over my sentiment, just like that. And then I'll give the part of the image that's showing, I'll just give that a quick watercolor and a little bit of color. And I'll make sure I'm using the same color that I used on my card for the snowberry leaves, which was a combination of the olive or tree green and that Payne's gray. That's quite a bit darker, so I need to add some more water and thin that down. I like the Impression Obsession inks because you can watercolor right over them and it doesn't actually reactivate the stamped image that you have there. So I really like using them for this particular technique because you can stamp in different colors then and watercolor with it, and I think it looks really beautiful. So just adding a little second layer of color there, and then I'll add a little bit of red to that berry. And then I think I'll go ahead and do some splattering. And I'm going to be careful to lift those splatters up by not touching my green leaves here because they are still wet. And that just gave a little bit of definition there by lifting some of that ink off of that cardstock. You can see that. And next I'm going to give it a little bit of splatter with gold as well. I'm going to use this smaller paintbrush here and keep my splatters a little bit smaller. There we go. Beautiful. All right, now I'm going to let this dry, and what I'm going to do is add a little bit of ink here to the outside edges, just like I did my stamped panel, and that will make it look like a little more cohesive with our stamped panel. So I'm going to go ahead and let this dry. And now I'm ready to actually add this to the front of my card. Oh, but first I'm going to add some faux stitching. I don't actually have a die that cuts a panel 3 3/4 by 5, so I like just using my little tracing wheel here to add the faux stitching, and that way I can add faux stitching to any piece of cardstock that I want. If I don't have a particular cutting die, that's okay. I've got the added little detail there. So I don't know if you can see how beautiful that gold is in there. Love that. All right. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to adhere this down to a background layer. And before I do that, I'm going to add a little bit of my brown ink to the outside edges. This is just a piece of brown cardstock. I don't remember what color it is, but it's just a mid-tone brown. And I'm going to add our watercolored layer to that cardstock. I'm going to use some double-sided tape here. My white glue has run out and I need to get to the store or get some ordered. Add a little bit over here. Look at that. That was torn off on the perfect length. All right. I don't remember who sent me this little pokey tool, but thank you so much. I use it all the time. I use it to pull the backing off of my double-sided tape. I use it to unclog my glue bottle. I use it for all kinds of things. I use it to stir paint when I get a little bit of separated pigment from the binder. I just love it. It works great. So thank you so much. I'll take off that little piece there as well. And then I'm going to add this to my brown cardstock. Getting it nice and straight. And now I'm ready to go ahead and add my sentiment banner. So I'm going to go ahead and add the same double-sided adhesive to my sentiment banner here. Making sure to add some to both sections of it. You want some on the piece that's going to be on your card front, and you also want it on the piece that's going to wrap around to the back side. Go ahead and pull that up. Okay. And decide where you want it added. And what I find helpful, oops, looks like I need to add some red to those berries. What I find helpful is to kind of fold this so it's almost touching, and that helps kind of place it on the card here straight, so you don't have quite a distance to go to get it to adhere to the card. I'm going to place it on there nice and straight, and now I have double-sided adhesive here, and I can also fold this around here, and it's ready to be glued down. Now I'm going to add this to an olive green card base. This is Stampin' Up's Old Olive. I love this color, and it's a perfect companion to Impression Obsession's Olive Green. So I'm just going to use more of my double-sided tape here and add this piece to my card base. Set that on there nice and straight. And if you'd like, you can also add a little bit of your brown ink to the edges of your card base as well. And I think that just kind of makes everything look nice and cohesive. And you can do that to the back side. See how it just makes that look like it's more finished. And you can also do it to the inside. Just give it a real quick brush with the ink. Beautiful. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you check out this beautiful stamp set from Impression Obsession. It's one of my absolute favorites. I just love the foliage designs that they've put into this set. And ooh, it looks like I forgot to add brown ink to around my sentiment panel. So you could do that as well before you adhere it down. Just ink around this panel here, and then it would blend in a little bit better with your card. So but anyways, I hope you enjoyed this technique. I hope you give it a try. And until we chat again, take care and have a good day.